Jason and Claire had been together for 3 years. They'd been through all the usual relationship trials, long-distance work trips, the awkward merging of friend groups. That one Christmas where Jason got food poisoning at Claire's parents' house. But through it all, they'd stuck together. This camping trip was supposed to be their reset. No phones, no emails, just a tent, the wilderness, and each other. Claire had planned it for weeks, choosing a remote site deep in the New Hampshire woods, away from tourists and well-worn hiking trails. No distractions, just the stars. They set up camp in the afternoon, pitching the tent in a clearing, surrounded by towering pines. Claire loved nature, loved the quiet of it. Jason, not so much. He was a city guy, more at home with traffic noise than birds song, but he didn't complain. He wanted to make her happy. As the sun dipped below the trees, Claire set up the camera. A high-end night vision rig she'd borrowed from her brother. "Why do we even need this?" Jason asked, handing her the tripod. Claire grinned. "For the stars. The camera picks up details we can't see with our eyes. It's like magic." Jason rolled his eyes but helped her set it up, angling the lens toward the deep black sky where the first few stars had begun to twinkle. They let the camera roll while they sat by the fire, drinking wine from tin cups and telling old college stories. By midnight, the fire had burned to embers. Jason yawned, stretching. "Think the camera caught anything cool?" Claire shrugged. "We'll check in the morning." They zipped into the tent and fell asleep almost immediately. The night was silent. The next morning, Claire woke first, stretching in the cool dawn air. Jason was still snoring. She grabbed the camera, excited to see the footage. She fast-forwarded through the first hour. Just static stars and the occasional flicker of wind in the trees. Then, around 2 a.m., something changed. The trees in the background seemed off. She paused the footage, squinted. One of the tree trunks looked too straight. No branches, no texture. Just a long, thin shape standing at the tree line. Her stomach knotted. She pressed play. At 2:37 a.m., the shape moved, not much. Just the slightest shift forward, like it had taken half a step. At 2:50 a.m., it took another. Claire's breath came shallow and fast. The thing was tall, at least 7 feet. Thin, like a man stretched out too far. It had no face, or at least not one the camera could pick up. Just an oblong blur where the eyes and mouth should be. By 3:15 a.m., it was just a few feet from the tent. Claire's stomach lurched. She fast-forwarded frantically. The figure didn't leave. It just stood there, watching. For hours, not moving, not breathing. Then, just as the sky began to lighten, at 5:04 a.m., it stepped back, faded into the trees, and disappeared. Claire turned off the camera and shook Jason awake. "Jason," she hissed, "wake up now." He groaned, rubbing his eyes. "What?" She shoved the camera into his hands. "Watch." As the footage played, Jason sat up straighter. His face went pale. "Holy shit," he whispered. Claire was already stuffing their gear into backpacks. "Claire? Wait. No waiting. We're leaving." Jason didn't argue. They tore down the tent, shoving everything into their packs in messy heaps. Jason kept glancing at the trees, his face tense. Claire didn't look. She couldn't. By the time they reached the car, the sun was high, the sky a bright, friendly blue. It should have made them feel safe. It didn't. Jason started the engine. Claire exhaled a shaky breath. "Do you think it was—" Jason stopped. He didn't want to finish the sentence. Claire shook her head. I don't know, but we're not coming back. Jason nodded. Then he glanced at the camera, still clutched in his hands, his face twisted. Clear? His voice was tight, shaky. What? Jason turned the screen toward her. The footage was still playing, the last few seconds. As they left the campsite, the camera caught something, a shape in the trees, tall, thin, watching. And this time, it moved. It followed. Claire's blood turned to ice. Jason hit the gas. The car sped away, gravel crunching beneath the tires. They didn't stop, didn't look back, and behind them, deep in the trees, something watched them go. Waiting, silent, still, for now. Ethan Miller had always been a skeptic. Ghost stories, urban legends, all that creepypasta bullshit. Nah, he didn't buy it. But his YouTube audience loved that kind of thing. His channel, Ethan Explores, had started out as basic travel vlogs. National parks, hidden waterfalls, abandoned places. But he'd learned quickly, if you wanted the views, you had to chase the weird shit. That's why he was out here, alone, deep in the Vermont wilderness. His latest challenge? 3 nights solo camping in the most remote part of the Green Mountain National Forest. The plan: hike 20 miles into the forest, set up camp, record everything, see if anything weird happened. Ethan didn't actually expect anything weird. But if he could edit together a few eerie moments, some flickering shadows, maybe a weird sound or two, boom, 100,000 views, easy. He hiked all day, sweating under the weight of his back. By the time the sun started dipping behind the trees, he was exhausted. Time to set up camp. Then he saw it. Another campsite, deep in the woods. Ethan frowned and raised his camera. Okay guys, check this out. I think I just found someone's old camp. He zoomed in. There were 2 tents, a fire pit still smoldering, and gear scattered around, backpacks, an old lantern, a folding chair tipped on its side. But something was off. The camp looked abandoned and lived in at the same time. The fire was still smoking. The tents looked intact, but they were dirty, covered in leaves and moss like they'd been there for years. And the weirdest part, there were no people. Ethan took a step closer, then another. The air smelled like charred wood and damp earth. Hello? He called. Nothing. He crept toward one of the tents, camera rolling. The nylon fabric was stained and sagging. He reached out, fingers brushing the zipper. And then he stopped. His skin crawled. His brain screamed, "Don't." It wasn't fear exactly. More like his body knew something was wrong before his mind could catch up. His pulse thudded. His mouth was dry. Something wasn't right. He swallowed, laughed nervously for the camera. Yeah, this is kind of creepy. I mean, someone had to be here, right? His own voice sounded small. He turned in a slow circle, filming everything. The fire pit, the lantern, the backpack lying half open, filled with clothes that looked decades old. Then, something crunched in the underbrush. Ethan whirled around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees, leaves, shadows creeping longer as the sun dropped lower. He exhaled, shook his head, and backed away from the camp. Okay, he muttered into the camera. I think I'm gonna... And then he stopped. Because the camp was gone. Just gone. No fire pit, no tents, no chairs or lanterns or old clothes. Only an empty patch of dirt, ringed by trees. Ethan's mouth went dry. He blinked, shook his head. He was standing in the exact same place. The same crooked branch was overhead, the same moss-covered log at his feet. But the camp, it had never been there. His heart started hammering. He turned the camera to himself. His hand was shaking. I don't know what just happened, he whispered. It was here. You guys saw it, right? He turned the camera around again, filming the blank patch of earth. Nothing. Not even an impression in the dirt where the tent had been. And yet, the air smelled like smoke. Like a fire had burned there just minutes ago. A cold dread curled in Ethan's gut. He suddenly needed to leave. He had a day's worth of hiking to get back to his car, and it wasn't safe here. He could feel it. He turned off the camera, shouldered his back, and started walking. And that's when he heard it. A sound from behind him. A zipper. A tent unzipping. Ethan froze. His pulse hammered in his ears. There's no camp here. It disappeared. I filmed it disappearing. It's just woods, just trees and dirt, and then the sound came again. Zeep, low, slow, right behind him. Ethan ran. His boots pounded against the earth as he sprinted through the forest, gasping. His camera swung wildly at his chest. He didn't stop. He didn't look back. He ran until he saw his own campsite. His real one. His blue tent exactly where he left it. He collapsed to his knees, sucking in air. He was done. First thing in the morning, he was getting the hell out of here. But first, he had to see. His hand shook as he fumbled with the camera. He rewound the footage. There, the camp. He had filmed it. Proof. He had proof. And then, the moment when he had turned around. When the camp had disappeared. But something was off in the video. His breath caught in his throat. The tents and fire pit and chairs hadn't disappeared. They were still there. But he was gone. The video showed the same exact scene, except Ethan wasn't in it. He stared at the screen, his heart hammering in his chest. He could hear his own breathing, the rustling leaves from when he ran. But he wasn't in the frame. He rewound it, again and again. The same, like he had never been there at all. A snapping twig, a whisper. Ethan froze. The hairs on his arms lifted. The whisper wasn't the wind. It was words, a voice right behind him. He turned his camera. There was nothing there. Just dark trees swaying. For a second he thought maybe he'd imagined it. Then, from just behind the camera, a breath, right next to his ear. Click, zipper. Ethan lunged into his tent and yanked the flap down. Heart jackhammering against his ribs. He pulled his camera close, rewound the footage. And this time, when he got to the part where the camp disappeared, when he saw himself alone, turning around in confusion, he noticed something new. Behind him, standing exactly where the camp had been, was a shape. The same shadowy figure, tall, too tall, faceless. And as he watched, it took a single step closer to the camera. Ethan barely slept. Every rustle outside made him hold his breath. Fingers locked around the knife in his pocket. But nothing happened. When the sun came up, he packed as fast as he could and sprinted down the trail, camera bouncing against his chest. He never even looked back. It wasn't until later, reviewing his footage in the safety of his apartment, that he noticed something else. That last clip, the one where the camp disappeared. There was something new in the footage, a tent, a fire, a lantern, a single folding chair, and a shadowy figure sitting in it, watching the camera. And then, just before the video cut to black, it stood up,